The house that sits on 4344 Marcia Court in San Diego is a fake. A phantom house. I know this because I used to live there. I witnessed its metamorphosis. I watched it shed paint like a caterpillar, transforming from a tacky yellow and brown checkerboard wallpaper to an even more flamboyant, too bright like the skin of the characters on The Simpsons, yellow. It sat in the middle of a small cul-de-sac filled with 8 households. Our house. The mustard house. In the late 80s and early 90s, we held a prestigious honor. We were the eyesore of the curved street. I used to tell people you would need sunglasses to look at us. I miss that eyesore. I miss that street. People say you can never really go back home, and I think of movies, how you can watch people move away from home, never to see their childhood bedrooms or the spaces they took up ever again. How you're supposed to be able to fill the pain created by distance with miles and miles. But I can go home, physically, at least. I'm telling you this because I think there is a phantom haunting the house on Marcia Court, and I believe it might be my father. Before we moved, the real estate lady gave tours of our home while Mom and I were still there. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed watching the Power Rangers on TV when a man and his wife walked in, waving hello, their voices high and ecstatic. His wife's swollen belly made its introduction first, and I could see their plans and possibilities for my house materializing right in front of them. I could already feel us fading away. Dad peeled away the yellow and brown checkerboard wallpaper on his own until his hands were thick with calluses. We stood side by side, brandishing paint rollers like swords, replacing the checkerboard of our kitchen with white. I'd gone with him to Home Depot every day. Watched him pick out bright blues and reds for the trim on our doorways and windows, colors he thought would match the dark chocolate brown of our bedroom doors, but somehow also matched the Simpsons yellow outside. The kitchen counters where I'd stood precisely beside him, watching him create miracles over the stove. The bathroom where he taught me how to wash my face, hands on a pink towel, pressing prayers into the skin of my cheeks to grow up well. The cupboard and closets where we played hide and seek, the living room where he carried me on his back, where we ate chocolate cereal after coming home from school recitals, the hall where we put up lights on the Christmas tree, and I watched the flickering rainbows dance off his glasses. This is where I'd been the most happy. This is where he had been real. A year before Dad died, he had a triple bypass heart surgery. I know how he looks in the pictures afterwards, in the weeks and months after he came home. I have memorized them without having to look at them. His face is always solemn, his mouth pressed into an unsteady line, even in the photos where I'm with him. My eyes focused on the camera, my mouth pressed into a permanent grin, like it always was when I was with him. I smiled so hard, so wide, you think I was trying to show you all the teeth I had in my mouth. In the end, Dad refused the pacemaker that would have saved him. I'm tired, he tells my mom, from his place on the couch, the frown lines on his forehead deepening. He slouches further into the seat, his shoulders hanging low. Jesus, wasn't one bypass enough? He wears scars from his first open heart surgery across his chest. They don't peek up from above his shirt as much as they splatter. Like spilled paint across the skin below his collarbones, the scarring like a sign that sits on his chest. He cannot hide. In the photos, though, Dad will always be there, looming behind me, his eyes downcast, his face far, far away, even when his arms are around me or he's lifting me up to his face. Maybe he was always there and not there, always here, but always somewhere far away. Maybe always stuck somewhere in between. We would eventually lose our house to bankruptcy shortly after Dad died, in the Philippines on a trip he would never get to come home from. The first time I visited my house again was only weeks after we moved out. It was November and I was turning 9. My first birthday not spent in that house. My first birthday without my dad. The sun was going down way too early, days were running away from me, and as my best friend and I approached the house, it seemed more menacing, unreal. My house had been stripped of its vibrancy, and all the ways Dad made it different and uniquely ours. Dad's fence had been torn down, and the house was no longer a Simpsons yellow or chocolate brown. No, it was white. You could look at it without having to turn away. Mom's rose garden too, her trees and her bushes of bright yellow daisies had been unearthed, ripped out of the front of the yard. I found myself feeling a certain kinship with them. With the setting sun casting shadows into the house, we clambered over the top of the fence my dad put up and into the backyard. She tried to shake me. I was vaguely aware of her arms trying to pull me back, but I could not stop myself from going forward. I had to see it with my own eyes. I stared into the giant windows and tried to comprehend the changes the construction workers were doing to the house, choking on the lump of panic in my throat as I looked. Paint cans and sheets of plastic littered our kitchen. A wall had been torn down to make the space bigger. Brown carpet lay in a corner of the living room like discarded animal fur. I felt like I was walking through a graveyard. I picked up rocks and began hurling them one after another at the dining room windows that used to be in my family's name. My best friend dragged me backwards, her arms around my waist as I kicked and screamed, angry, hot tears blurring my vision from the house that was no longer mine. I started visiting every week to torture myself, watching what this family saw as the remodel of their new dream home. I viewed it as the demolition of my childhood. I got Mom involved too. It was equal parts weird curiosity and also, I'm sure, kind of like the relief you can only get from drinking too much, which is to say that there's no relief at all. The bags under my mom's eyes seemed to deepen, especially in those first few weeks, when we repeated this routine, which was more self-inflicted wound than therapy or coping. Each time we drove by our house, it was like ripping a fresh bandage off, a wound that would not scab over and could not heal. The apartment we moved into was a few blocks from our old house. We still shared the same zip code. We drove past our cul-de-sac on the way to get groceries and haircuts, to go to the bank and Walmart. The memory of what we had lost, clung to our backs. How could we move on when it stuck out like a thorn in our side anytime we tried to pull forward? We started going to the house in the middle of the night, on the way home from movies, on the way to Home Depot. I wanted to see if the kids on the block replaced me in their afternoon games, to look at the cars parked in our driveway, to hear the laughter of new voices billowing up from the place where my dad had been the most real. What did I expect to see? What do I still hope for sometimes? New tenants who are just as haunted by this piece of property as I am? My dad waving in the window? His booming voice scaring the new owners? See, Dad was a huge Elvis fan. I could see it perfectly. The new homeowner was running down the driveway, scurrying away in horror as Dad's laughter, or maybe a rendition of Are You Lonesome Tonight, echoed through the living room, where he taught me how to dance on his feet, where he had played his guitar. The sound stretching down the street I grew up on, like a long crescendo. Or maybe just a glimpse of him passing by, as our battered red Mazda slowed to a crawl. Or the thick smell of the musky cologne and aftershave he used to wear. The pomade gel he used to slather on his hair that made him look like Ricky Ricardo from I Love Lucy. The same thick gel, the color of gasoline, would cling to the collars of his shirts like tire tracks. When he was alive, my mother would dedicate herself to washing them until the palms of her hands were raw and an angry red. They thought about this often. I wonder sometimes, though, if we both obsessed over pressing our noses to the inside of those collars after Dad was gone. Thankful, for once, that laundry detergent could not rinse out his memory. But I was never lucky enough. Nothing like that ever materialized. Each time we visited our house, we were met only by darkness and the sound of crickets, the slow crawl of our tires against the black pavement. The silence that followed as me and Mom's voices evaporated into an eerie final note as we stared up at the house that was no longer ours. Grief will do that to you, you know? Shut you up. I wonder sometimes if any of the neighbors watched us from our windows during one of these visits. I wonder what they thought, watching a widow and her young daughter visiting this house, a memory like a museum or a grave. People used to tell me, as if there's some kind of balm you can slather over the wound of losing a parent to smother the ache and make it feel less like you're drowning but floating, that no one ever really dies, so as long as the person you lose lives on in your memories. If I'm being honest, I can't breathe sometimes, realizing I don't even remember what Dad's voice was like anymore. And there are days when I forget to think about him. Sorry, guys. Is he less real then? Is the endless gaping hole of my grieving not true if I have the capability to forget? One thing I'm sure of though, I only know what it's like to live in a world where I can no longer hear his voice. My favorite song. Growing up, imagining Dad haunting our old house brought me comfort, even joy, I think. I wanted to see him again, and I convinced myself if I could just catch a glimpse, it would prove that he was stuck somewhere he didn't want to be. Just like me. Sorry. Maybe then I hoped it would be easier to sleep, knowing there's someone like me who remained just as haunted. Mom and I eventually moved again, and again, and it became harder to check up on our old house. But I found grief follows you everywhere. I still drive by that cul-de-sac on the way to the movies sometimes, and looking up home is just a click away. So maybe a ghost is something more than just a memory preserved within the framework of a house, and grief is just like music, captured in the time and playing on and on like one of my dad's favorite Elvis songs, asking, "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Is your heart filled with pain? Shall I come back again? Tell me, dear, are you lonesome tonight?"